If magic is even real is something that keeps a lot of people up at night, specifically actual practitioners of what we would call magic. I think this is an issue for a couple of reasons. One, because it seems like atheists, agnostics, Christians, whoever is sort of peddling this narrative that magic isn't real or that it's just for fairy tales or whatever, it's allowing their narrative to be more present than it needs to be, or it's allowing it to sort of take over other spaces where it's unnecessary or where it dilutes the power of whatever else you're doing. And it's also not useful because it keeps a lot of people who want to practice or who are already practicing some kind of what we would call magic, very like 1 foot in and 1 foot out. There's a sense of not being committed to what you are doing, to what you are claiming to do. Of course, a lot of people are tricked into this, so to speak, because they're scared of looking stupid. And that's fascinating to me, one, because magic is something you do, behind closed doors most of the time, but also because the flimsiness of the argument that magic isn't real is so flimsy and so scattered that I don't know why we give it so much credence. So I want to talk a little bit today about both the conversation with other people who quote unquote don't believe in magic, and then also the question of not trusting your own practice. You're doubting yourself of whether or not your magic is real. So I'm first going to talk about the question of the general public's idea, or the parroted idea, that magic isn't real, that it's just for fantasy books and fairy tales. And I actually watched an interview with George R.R. Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones series, and there's magic in his books. And he also says he does not believe in magic because he doesn't believe in God. I don't know, it was confusing, but he says he doesn't believe in magic, and I don't know what he really means by that, because then he just started talking about Jesus Christ, so that was confusing. Anyway, maybe I'm misremembering parts of that, but I don't really feel like correcting myself because I just found it, again, to be as confusing as it is me re-explaining it. Anyway, I want to break down this idea of, well, magic isn't real, like what the actual saying is. And if we're going to say that magic isn't real, we first have to define real and magic. And most people who say magic isn't real are never pushed on the topic, so we never get to hear from them what they're talking about when they're talking about reality and when they're talking about magic. So if we're first defining what real means, we're going to have to consider, like, what does it mean for something to be real? A lot of people who say that magic isn't real are very into science. So I'm assuming to them it would mean that it would have to be measurable, by a certain method that they use, even though magic and science, although they go in hand, and a lot of, quote unquote magical things can be explained or can be broken down through science. They're two different ways of working with information. There are two different ways of working with energy. So I guess, if you want to use your scientific method, or if your version of the world has to fit within a scientific method, and that's how you prove reality, okay. Are you saying that things are real because you can see them with your eyes? Are you saying that real is because someone specific thinks that it's real, like your pastor or your father or, someone that you respect, because they said something isn't real, then it isn't, or something is real, then it is? Does it have to be tested by a specific scientist, a specific group? Because this is the other thing. A lot of things can be tested by people, and then people will say, well, that person XYZ. And a lot of trials of whether something is real or not, what we run into a lot of times is the issue of the subjective, that even what is real itself is a subjective experience. And so when someone is telling you that magic isn't real to them, or let's say it's happening to me, someone's telling me that, okay, that's fine that you don't think that that's real. Side note, like, how powerful is that also, that if you don't believe in magic, then you would never see that as a possible reasoning for something happening. You would never do anything about it. You would never protect yourself from it. You would never try it and engage with your power in that kind of way. So it's kind of a fail-safe locked into it if you think about it in that way. All that to say that real as a priority, or something being real and using that term, it ends up being a moving target. It ends up being something that is very subjective, and especially when there have been so few accurate depictions of the entirety and the diversity of what magic is. And that there are some very honest and real depictions of magic in fiction, just like there have been some very real depictions of grief, very real depictions of abuse, very real depictions of XYZ in fictional depictions, because art and fiction mirrors life, and it's a way, story is a way for us to grapple with real life. So just because magic shows up in something that has been labeled as fiction doesn't mean that it itself isn't real. In fact, it might be a stronger case to say that because magic shows up in so much fiction and because magic shows up in so much story, that it is incredibly real, and maybe more real than even we think. So there's my relationship to this idea of real and reality. And obviously there are other episodes of podcasts and things like that for you to listen to get my understanding of what reality really is. But to understanding what the person you're speaking to or the organization or whatever it is that's telling you that something is or isn't real, getting an understanding of what their definition of reality is very important, and it's often missed. Then the second thing we have to define is magic. What is magic, and how do you define it? And how are you saying it is or isn't real if you cannot define it? I've seen people say magic isn't real, like there aren't dragons. Magic isn't real, there aren't witches. It's like, okay, well, do you mean that there aren't people who can move things with their minds, who can, there's such a wide array of what these things have expressed themselves as or looked like throughout history, throughout depictions, both fictional and real. So when you say it's not real, what are you talking about? What aspects are you talking about? And do you mean that it's like it's not effective? Because if they're saying that it doesn't work, then that's a different objection, right? A lot of people also say astrology isn't real, which is such a weird thing to say. Astrology is a way of approaching interpretation of planetary movements and placements. That's a real thing that people do. Whether or not it's effective, whether or not, the way that they're interpreting is correct, these kinds of things can be disputed and should be, because these are things that should always be in conversation and are fascinating. And a lot of practitioners of these arts, I happen to be an astrologer as well as a wizard, the debates over these things in the arts is very healthy and is very important. But to say, these things aren't real, okay, what are we actually talking about? If the person that's saying, magic isn't real is thinking of something very specific, like, oh, a woman can't turn a person into a frog. That's their version of what magic is. You can't shapeshift. You can't do XYZ. Okay, well, what if I agreed with you and said that XYZ is not possible in your world, but in my world, ABC is possible? And that is what I'm defining as magic. Then we're having a whole different conversation, because we're actually acknowledging the subjectivity and we're acknowledging the reality of both of our experiences and maybe the limitation in either of our experiences and how we're defining or relating to this idea or this topic. And often people will go for magic isn't real instead of saying magic doesn't work, because that objection of it not working requires proof. And where are they going to find that? You know what I mean? And again, there are studies that what I would say would support both sides. So, then we're sort of prioritizing one or the other. And this is honestly for saying anything is real or anything is anything. You can find studies for both sides, because that's how science works. Unfortunately, that's how science works. So yeah, it's wild to say that magic isn't real, or people can't practice magic, because people around the world every day are practicing magic, and that's what they're calling it in their own languages, in their own terms. So if we can never agree on what magic is in the first place, then can we disprove it? And again, this is another kind of underlining of why there's so much power in magic. It being undefinable, but people refuse to acknowledge its power, gives it a lot of power, gives it its kind of subversive and slippery nature. And that is what people are using to their advantage who practice it. So moving on, now that we've sort of talked about just this phrase that people throw around, that magic isn't real, we can talk a little bit about your relationship to your own practice and your relationship to your own spiritual practice. And oh my God, is this really real? Is it really doing anything? And what I want to say first and foremost, and sort of primarily, is you have to choose. It's important that you decide what it is that you believe, what it is that you are trying to validate through your own experience, because no one is going to validate anything to be true or real enough for you without you first being willing to believe it, being willing to see for yourself that that's true. There has to be a decision that's made, and then a sort of journey with the proof of that decision, if it's so important to you. That's the other thing, like whether or not it's real is not important to some practitioners. There are some agnostic witches, there are atheist witches. There are people who are practicing quote unquote magic and defining it roughly in the magic sort of paradigm, so to speak, who are not like quote unquote believers. You know, they're not like, oh, this is going to work 100% of the time and this is the end all be all. But for them, it's like it's true enough, or it works well enough. It works, and so I don't really want to question it or need to know, you know. So your orientation is yours, and it's important for you to choose what your orientation is to this kind of work, okay? And then my other question, or I don't know if the other one was a question, but this is now a question, is what does it cost you to believe in magic? Or what does it cost you to believe that you can impact your reality with your own energy? AKA, what does it cost you to believe that your magic is real? You know, the cost of being ridiculed by an atheist or something like that seems really high, because there's a history of witch trials and persecutions, and also persecution of Christians, persecution of anybody of a particular belief has usually happened throughout history and time. And, you know, that is real. And at the same time, as of today, you know, September 2025, it's safe enough for us to have these conversations. So, you know, for that to be your main reasoning, you know, to not want to be confronted or be uncomfortable, you know, then you can just keep it to yourself. You don't have to tell anyone that you practice these things. You can keep it to yourself. At some point, you'll have to decide within your own practice if it's important for you to make a decision, or for you to tell people, or for you to be honest about it, or for you to be forthcoming about it publicly. That might become an important aspect of your practice itself. But until then, you know, you're welcome to just keep it to yourself if you'd like. Most people do. Answering the cost of what it costs for you to invest in this practice or in this belief, you'll then find evidence to support either claim. Whether it's I don't believe magic is real, there's plenty of evidence that you could use to back up that claim, and vice versa. I just want to say that essentially, in conclusion, magic is many, many, many things. And it takes many forms and has many faces. Allowing yourself to engage with people who water things down and reject them, I would really encourage you to challenge them on that, especially if they're people that you're actually in a relationship with that you love, and that say that they love you. I think it's important to challenge them on just doing that in general to anything. I think that it can be a very dangerous way to go about life, you know? So magic is many, many things. And most of all, magic is personal. And it is intimate and cultural and historical, but it's very intimate, it's very personal, and it belongs to you. It belongs to whatever hands it's in. And so remember that. Remember that it's yours. First and foremost, it's your journey, it's your experience, it's your perception, it's your power, it's your engagement that makes any of this matter. There will come a time when it's important for you to understand whether or not ownership over what you do, or how you take ownership over what you do, right, by claiming that this is real, or this matters, or this is powerful, or whatever, you know, that might become important. It might not. You might just be listening to this or watching this because you're just interested, or because you don't believe in magic, or whatever. You might be listening for whatever reason, but I'm specifically speaking to people who are interested or have or want to engage with this idea of magic. And when I'm speaking about magic, I'm not talking about magicians who pull rabbits out of hats, although that also is a form of magic. And I love, you know, the David Blaines of the world as well, but I'm specifically talking about spiritual magic. I'm talking about working with energy in a way that's meant to impact reality on a broader scale and on a personal level as well. I mean, at this point, it's like, we know there are non-believers. We know it's very obvious, and they make it very plain and clear what they find funny and, you know, stupid and to not be real or true. We know what they don't believe, but what do you believe, really? And what is the journey that you are willing to go on, or that you're already on, to actually fully engage with that question? And obviously the caveat of that is it necessary to believe? Is that necessary at all? I would say that when you start to engage with certain levels of spiritual practice, it's not really about belief. So there's that. Thanks for going on this journey with me today. I think it's a really important conversation because it's timeless, and it also is extremely haunting. I think it haunts practitioners. I think it haunts dabblers. I think it haunts many people. I think it haunts the people that say magic isn't real the most, actually. So thanks for joining me in this conversation. I'll see you next time.